everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Regina, and in today's video we are going to start seeds for our cool weather spring crops. So we're talking a lot of leafy greens, things like that, the things that can handle a light frost, so we can put those out before our last frost date, but they prefer those cooler temperatures that the spring provides. So first step for me when I'm getting started in my garden, I'm planting and starting my seeds. The first thing is to plan out where things are going to go so I know how many plants I need. Now for these cool weather crops, I'm actually devoting one 5x8 raised bed to these cool weather vegetables. One, because the cool weather vegetables, they're leafy greens, most of them, so those are ones that you're going to be able to go back to multiple times. And so with that being said, you don't have to have nearly as many plants in order to get a good harvest, because generally this past year, all of my leafy greens, aside from ones that I harvested whole, like cabbages and beets and things like that, all the other leafy greens, all of the kale and collards and stuff like that that were growing leaves, they actually grew through the summer. Now in the summer, I didn't get a lot of harvest from them because this is Texas, it gets super hot and there were just tons of bugs and stuff and it was hard to keep them in a good place. So they got eaten up quite a bit. But once those summer temperatures started to die down, I did, take off all the leaves that had been eaten and chewed. And then the kale especially continued to produce. So I actually got fall crop from them as well. So I'm hoping to do the same with the things that I start today. For those crops that I'm not going to harvest whole, I want to be able to harvest from them all the way through spring, and then when it becomes untenable in summer, that's fine. I'll kind of let them chill and live their lives, and then in the fall, be able to harvest from the same plants again. So it's kind of nice because for some of these, I won't have to replant them for a fall garden. So the way that I plan this out, I use a square foot gardening method to plan out my raised beds, intensive spacing. Because seed packets, if you don't know this, here's some great information for you. Seed packets, when they give this spacing, they give spacing as if you're planting in rows. So they always tell you the amount of space in between each plant, but then they also tell you the space in between the rows. And a lot of people don't know that that spacing is on center. So for instance, if they say that the spacing for, beets or whatever is 12 inches, or for, a cabbage is 12 inches, then that means that that plant needs like 12 inches of space, like around it. So like 6 on each side. So that means the plant would be in the center, and then you need 12 inches on either, or 6 inches on either side to make 12 inches. So that's a handy piece of information to know as well. So with that, you can calculate how much you can plant in each square foot. Now, I don't necessarily have to do that based on my packets because of the internet, and someone's already done a lot of that work. So I use, this one is from K-State University. I've printed this out and been using it since last year, but I'll put it on the screen. It's just a one-sheeter that has a lot of different vegetables listed and the spacing that you need for them for intensive spacing. I like to space things as close together as possible. That is good for the plant, of course, not too close together, but as close together as I can in order for the plant to still thrive, because one, that provides ground cover, right? Instead of growing weeds, you're growing your own weeds. So you have less space for weeds and things like that to come up, and also keeps the soil, cool and warm because you have plants covering it. So to me, it's just a great option, and not to mention you can get more food out of less space. So I'll put this sheet because I just found it on the internet, and it has very good spacing guidelines for a lot of different vegetables. And then anything that's not here, because there are some things that aren't, then I'll just Google those for the square foot method. And a lot of times you can find different lists and different blogs that people have created to be helpful for other gardeners like me and like you, and find out what ideal spacing is for a certain vegetable in a square foot method. So what I do is I map that out, and I'll put an image of this on the screen too so that it can be seen a little better. But I map that out on the chart I have here, and I just draw my bed on a piece of paper. Sometimes I do it online, especially for my summer garden, because my summer garden I use many more beds for that. But since I'm just using one bed for this cool weather stuff, then I just drew it out on a piece of paper. but I just draw out the squares and then I write in there what I'm planting in each one and the number of that. I generally will just do one type of thing per square to make it easier. So for instance, I am doing the 5 square feet of beets, and 16 because beet spacing is just 3 inches. So I can fit 16 beets in each square. 16 times 5, that gets me to 80. So I need to start 80 seeds for beets. Now beets last year, I actually grew them. I put seeds straight into the ground at the end of February, which worked fine, but I would like to get them a little earlier this year. And I tried putting them straight into the ground back in December, and that did not work out because they had a really deep freeze. We don't generally get like a deep hard freeze past late February, end of March. So my plan for the plants that we're starting today is to put them outside mid to late February, or a little bit 4 to 6 weeks from now. And that's why I'm starting them at this time. So, but beets, they can be transplanted even though they are a root crop. And so the other things I have listed here, I do have some things that are already planted in this bed. My garlic is planted in this bed, and it was planted back in October, I want to say. And so that's already there and growing. It's survived deep freezes, you know, garlic over winter, so it's fine. And then I also have a lavender plant growing in this bed and thyme. I like having herbs around, of course, because they're great at helping to confuse those bugs that are looking for my brassicas, which a lot of these plants will be. And they're perennial, so they've been growing since last year, so I'm gonna leave them there. I just keep them to 1 square foot, and they're doing great. So everything else I'm planting here, like I said, it's listed. I'll put this on the screen. But so I go in and I fill in what I want and where in that bed. And I do take some consideration for shade and things like that. But for the most part, I am right outside of Dallas. We get plenty of sun. My backyard doesn't have any big trees in it. And where this bed is, it's full sun. So essentially, even if there's like one plant over here that might shade something to the side, that thing will get sun eventually because of how much sun there is in my backyard. So I don't have to worry about that too much, and because most of the stuff is getting started at the same time. All right, so once I do that, then I just kind of add it all up and make a list for how many I need of each thing. And then I went through, because some of my plants I'm starting in larger things like this size, which is, I want to say this is like 2 inches on each side and maybe about 3 inches deep, 3 or 4 inches deep. So these are larger ones. And then I have some that I'm starting in these smaller cells. Yeah. So I went through and I just kind of made some decisions on which ones I would start in the smaller versus the larger. It's just easier to start them in the smaller ones, but not everything is going to fit in there for 4 to 6 weeks. And if things start to outgrow these containers, then I'll just check the weather and maybe able to put them outside a little early, but they should be good. So cabbage, the kale, things that I know are going to get larger and maybe even larger faster, I'm starting those in the larger cells. And then some of the ones that'll probably be smaller that don't get as big, which means they'll probably be smaller even as seedlings, then I'm starting those in the smaller trays. But it was just kind of me estimating and making sense of, yeah, what I had on hand. So the other thing I wanted to share with you guys is just seed organization and how I keep track of them. I know for me, I went through a few different things, so I figured out something that worked. And so if that is you, I figure I'll go ahead and show you what I'm doing in case that is an idea that you might want to try. So I used to just keep all of my seed packets like this, just kind of folded over or paper clipped and in a plastic bag. And that worked until I grew my garden, and that meant that my seed collection grew as well. And it just got to be really disorganized and kind of annoying, and seeds would fall out, whatever. So when that stopped working, I found this thing. I bought it on Amazon. I might, if it doesn't show clearly in the video, I'll take a little picture. But it's supposed to be used like in crafts. Okay, y'all, my feet are falling asleep. Not sitting comfortably. It's used in crafts, and it holds like little jewels, I guess, that you would put onto stuff like rhinestones, you know, if you're a crafter. I'm not. But but it's perfect for seeds. So I went through the process last year, and I like all the seed packets I had on hand. I dumped them in these little things. This is what they look like. These little thingies and containers. And then I wrote information about the seed on some of them. On the container, some I just took pictures of the seed packet. So I had the info and like the year. I did write the year on here that the seed came from. And that was it. And then I stored them in here. But then I over this, when it got time to plant more of my summer crops, I realized that like this wasn't going to hold everything. And it was kind of annoying to do this. It took forever. And so I saw in someone else's video, I do not remember which YouTuber it was, but they showed this thing. And it's a larger, it's like a photo case is what it's used for like scrapbookers. And it, okay, much better. So this little case has these little boxes like this that open. And these things are perfect for seed packets. So I didn't have to dump the seeds out of the packet and all of that stuff. I just put the whole seed packet in here. And so this is what I'm doing going forward. Obviously, I'm going to use the seeds I have in this thing, but I won't be refilling them with seeds. And this holds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This is 16 boxes, and each one of these boxes can hold a ton of seed packets. And so I don't have them labeled or anything, but I do have them organized by like the type, like these are beans and, you know, like pole beans and things like that kind of are in that family. Also my southern peas. And I put them all kind of together, grouped. And this has worked really well because it's just really fast to get them organized. And if I fill up all of these, then, you know, I'll get another one. But this thing is great for seed storage. So you can keep your seeds tidy and so they won't get wet and they'll last you years. Seeds don't last forever, but I have used old seeds and in general they still work. All right, so now all my seeds, so I have all the seeds that I'm using today out here. Some of them are in these and then the rest of them are in packets. And I've already gotten all of my trays ready. So let's get started planting. So first up on the list are beets. And so, like I mentioned, I'm growing 80 beets, 16 per square foot, 5 square feet. So here's a tray. This one, 1, 2, 3, 6, 9. This is 54, and then I have a few more prepped as well. Now for my soil that I use for most of my seed starting, it's just a mixture of peat moss and vermiculite. I want to say it's 3 parts peat moss to 1 part vermiculite. I mentioned in another video, I think once I'm done with all of the peat moss I have, and I have quite a bit because I have probably like half a cube in my garage. But once I'm done with all that, I think I'll switch to cocoa cord because it's better for the environment. But I will be using all the peat moss I have, so it might take me through all of my seeds starting for the year, but we'll see. So the soil is already pre-moistened and it's in these small cells. They're like 1 inch by 1 inch. I believe 1 inch depth as well. And the beets I'm growing, these are rainbow beets. Last year I grew Detroit dark red beets, and then I just had 1 square foot of them and they came out great. I'll put some pictures up so you can see them, but they were really fun to grow and harvest. And I learned last year that I like beets. I don't think I had ever really eaten a fresh beet by itself. I had some before, like fresh, and I would buy them and then put the greens and the beet, chop it up, put it in smoothies. But I hadn't really had them like alone. And they were sweet and roasted. They were really delicious, and even raw, they were good. And my kids liked them too. They tasted almost like similar to carrots, but like sweeter. So with that, I really want to grow some more because I love the greens. The greens were delicious. They're I want to say very closely genetically related to Swiss chard, and the greens taste just like Swiss chard, which, so I like to eat them cooked and also in smoothies. And then the beets are really good. So far I've had them roasted. I know you can pickle them, but I'm not particularly interested in pickling them. I would rather eat them fresh, roasted, or raw, in salads, all kinds of ways. So that's why I'm growing so many beets, because I like them a lot, and nutritionally they're great for you. So the seeds, I should have done this already, but just putting holes, just a little indentation into the tray. I don't want them too deep because these trays aren't that deep. And these are going, and I'm not going to let them get huge anyway because they are root crops. So, I don't want them growing a whole beet in this little cell. So that's why I knew I could get away with putting these in the smaller ones. But putting 2 seeds per cell, just in case. And now I'm going to stop talking because I'll probably fast forward this in the footage. All right, so here's my first 54 beets, and if you're wondering, this tray actually came in 72, but I cut it down to 54 to fit into this foil cookie sheet that I have it in, so I can water from the bottom, etc. So I need it on something, so that's why I cut it down to this size. But I realized that some of these cells are not completely full. Like when I pushed them down, they actually went down really far, so I didn't smash them all very good. So I'm gonna add just a little bit more soil to the top of this. And the soil that I have already made up is right in this bin. I have a little bit left. I have to mix more up soon. Remember, making seed starting mix, I may do a video on it, but it's super easy, guys. Seed starting mix, if you buy it, is very pricey. If you're gonna grow a lot of plants, obviously if you're just planting a few, it's not a big deal. But if you're planting a lot of plants, like this is just one raised bed worth of plants. Imagine how many plants I do for my summer garden. And if you were trying to buy seed starting mix for all of that, you would go broke. I mean, obviously you wouldn't, but you know what I mean. It's expensive. And gardening can get expensive if you don't pay attention. So I just make my own. I started doing this last year after I bought like 3 or 4 bags of seed starting mix and still needed a bunch more. But it's just way less expensive. I just do peat moss, vermiculite, 3-to-1 ratio, 3 peat moss to 1 vermiculite, and I mix it with, and then I add boiling water, and I do that just to kill any bugs or insects that are in it, because sometimes you just never know. And then you bring insects in your house, and that's really annoying, especially if they're like fungus gnat eggs or something. So that's how I blend it together, using boiling water, so that kills any of that. And then I have my sterile seed starting mix. So I recommend it. All right, now these are adequately covered. All right, so first tray of beets is planted. so now on to the rest of the beets. They're gonna go in this tray and this tray. So that gives me a total of 80, because this is 18, and then this is 8. And I put the seeds on the ground because I didn't have nowhere to put them. So that was not smart, but oh well. These I did pack down a little bit better, I believe. So I'm not gonna have to, shouldn't have to go over them with more soil. All right, putting 2 seeds per cell also. Now, from what I understand, beet seeds are actually multiple seeds in one, so we'll see how many plants end up germinating, but I will be thinning them down to 1. So that's it for the beets. Beets are all planted. Now I need to get a towel to clean my hands so that I can open the next seed packet to plant something else. Just gonna. Okay, next up. All right, so next up, Chinese celery. I have never grown this before, so I'm pretty excited to try it. It says that it's smaller and more delicate than celery. I love celery, mainly for cooking. My husband is from New Orleans, he's Creole, and we eat a lot of different foods, and celery is a key component in a lot of them. So it is important to me to grow celery, and also I wouldn't mind like dehydrating some as well. I have some dehydrated leaves that I use, and they add really great flavor to soups and things like that. So I want to grow a bunch of celery to use fresh, to freeze, to use later, etc. So I'm excited to try this new variety. So like these planted, these are tiny, tiny seeds. So I'm not sure if like the other celery I've grown, it needs light to germinate. But so I'm gonna plant the seeds, just put them on top of the soil, and then I'll just work them in. I'm just gonna put a few. Like I just need 1 plant per cell, obviously, but I am just not, yeah, I just wanna be safe. So I'm gonna put a few, and then I'll just thin. Because generally when you're planting seeds, the planting depth usually is kind of determined by the size of the seed, because you got to think about that seed has to have enough energy from that cell to be able to get to the surface where the light is. And so the smaller the seed, the less energy there is in the seed for the plant to use in order to make it to the surface. So the smaller the seed, the higher up it needs to be. The larger the seed, the deeper you can plant it, and it'd still be okay. Now that's not necessarily exact science, but from my experience and based on how, you know, it works. So I'm planting these, but they're quite shallow. I'm just mixing them in to the soil. The other celery I plant, the tall Utah celery, that actually needs light to germinate. So you just kind of lay it on top of the soil and just barely cover it. So I'm kind of giving these similar treatment, just maybe a teeny bit deeper. I didn't end up with any of them under my fingernails. All right, planted. That is my Chinese celery. And then in these 8 cells, I did cut things apart kind of to make it a little easier on myself. It's gonna be annoying next year probably if I don't have the same exact numbers, but so I didn't have to make a label for every cell. To label, I actually didn't show you guys that, but to label, I just use these little popsicle sticks. For the smaller cells, I cut them in half. And then for the larger ones, I leave them whole. Because you don't want them crazy tall, because then you can't get your lights down as low as you want. So I cut them in half for these small cells. So these 8 cells are for pak choi. Once again, something else I've never grown, but I am very excited. I have tasted it before, and it is delicious. Also known as bok choy, but Chinese cabbage, and you eat the stalks and the leaves. It is delicious. So let's get some bok choy planted. So I'm doing 2 seeds per cell. These are really tiny seeds as well. So we'll be planting them very deep. The really shallow ones I just sprinkle on the soil and then mix in. Then press them down. The only thing is I have to pay attention to where I put them or I'll forget, because the seeds are dark brown like the soil. All right, bok choy is planted. So this tray is ready. Set it down here. Set the ones I've done over here. All right, next up is our last tray of the smaller ones. So in these 18, I'm doing mustard greens. So let's find those. Southern Giant curled mustard. These I grew some of these last year and they were delicious. So, but I'm gonna put little indentations. These are tiny, but I noticed in that last one, it was actually kind of hard to press the soil down because I packed it in so hard. So I was afraid the seeds were gonna get stuck to my finger. So I am gonna make little divots to put them in. So it's a little bit easier. I'm trying to put two in each cell, but they're tiny, so we'll see. All right, mustard greens are done. Next up, we have tatsoi. So tatsoi is another Chinese green. It's brassica as well. It looks kind of cool. I've never had it, but it looks neat. So we're gonna grow it. I think the plants can get kind of big, but here you go. I'll put these seed packets on the screen so you guys can see a little bit more about these veggies. I need to wipe my hands off though. I don't want to get packed dirty. Now I know gloves would make that easier, right? But gloves are kind of a pain because I feel like I like to fill the seeds and it just makes it harder. So these guys, 8 of these. I'm a little skeptical about this, y'all, because I have Asian cabbage down as 6-inch spacing, but This packet says 18 inches, so I think these things might get big. So I might end up not having to use all of these plants and find somewhere else to put them. All right, that's done. And I think I mentioned this, but pre-moistening your soil is a must for seed starting. It just makes everything a lot easier. One, because a lot of the seed starting mixes contain peat moss, and it is not like, it's hard to get the water to absorb into the peat moss at first. It's almost like it's hard, like it has to break that structure for the first time. So pre-moistening the soil makes it to where you would hate to fill these up with dry soil, and then at the end you go to water them and pour water on top and it doesn't absorb, and then your seeds float up. It's just a mess. So pre-moistening your soil means that your seeds are going to stay in place. You don't have to worry about them floating around when you go to water, because it's already moistened. You don't have to water when you're done. And then it's also really helpful if you bottom water as well. So once you need to water, so I always have them on some sort of tray. They all have holes in the bottom, of course. And then I just bottom water everything. That helps to prevent the growth of fungus on top. Doesn't mean it won't. Sometimes they do grow algae and that's not a big deal. But you don't want fungus growing and then you attracting fungus gnats, and then it becomes a big old mess. So I just bottom water everything. Then you can actually see that the water is getting absorbed. And then if there's any water left after about 10-15 minutes, you dump that out. Keeps you from overwatering as well. And once the top of the soil is dry is when I go in and go ahead and water things. Just wanted to throw that tidbit in. All right, next up we have our tall Utah celery. So I'm just gonna move this guy over so I don't, not in my way. Tall Utah celery. This celery I know requires sunlight requires light to germinate. So this I just sprinkle on top of the soil and barely work it in. I want to get it like pushed up against the soil but not dumped in. So let's see, where's my celery? Oh, here we go. I did grow this celery last year. I think I might have a picture of it that I can throw on the screen. And it grew really well. I only grew a few of them because I'd never grown celery before, and I'd heard that celery was really hard to grow, and it turned out fine. So it wasn't like, the stalks weren't as big and thick as the celery you buy in a store, but that's something I've learned through gardening, that things often aren't like, sometimes they're not as big. Now the cabbages I've grown some really big cabbages, but some things just aren't as big, and it's because, you know, there's different practices used in agriculture that aren't necessarily what you're using at home, and fertilizers and things like that, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. So yeah, but the flavor of it was excellent, and it didn't require blanching, which is nice because I don't know. Oh crap, that's a lot of seeds I just poured out into my hand. These are tiny, tiny. These are smaller than the Chinese celery seeds. So I'm just gonna sprinkle a few on the soil, and I'll just thin it out once they germinate. If I remember correctly, these did take a little while to germinate. Okay, as many as I could. So, do you want to push these down, make sure they have nice contact with the soil, but I'm not gonna really bury them. Okay, there's that. And then lastly, this is some lettuce. I actually do not have a place for this lettuce in the raised bed, but I did want to grow some, and I might just, once these grow and sprout, put them in, like, I grew lettuce last year in some milk jugs just under my grow lights and kept it growing so that I had fresh lettuce when I needed it. And so I think that's what I might do with these, but I'm gonna go ahead and plant them now. And this lettuce I'm doing Grand Rapids leaf lettuce, and then also Paris Island lettuce. Now, it does grow into a head, but I don't really grow lettuce to a head. I just grow it for the leaves because growing it to a head takes up way more space and takes a lot of time. And to me, that's just not necessary. I need lettuce leaves for my salads. Here I go again with my dirty hands. Should have grabbing scissors, but I'm not getting up. My knees, no, not doing that. Okay, so Paris Island, or Grand Rapids lettuce is what I've just opened. So I'm just doing one row of each. Okay, I'm a very liberal lettuce planter. I just put a bunch of seeds, let them grow, and then when I move them to another container, I just grow it all close together. Because remember, when you're growing for heads, you have to worry about spacing and have enough space for that one seed to turn into a head. But when you're growing it for leaves, you can plant it a lot more densely. And by the way, this lettuce, this one, the Paris Island, and the Grand Rapids, I keep holding these things up, but I'm not sure if they're gonna show well. And if not, I'll put an image. But I bought these at the Dollar Tree. I actually bought these yesterday. They have their seeds out now, and I used Dollar Tree seeds, plenty of them last year. I get seeds from all kinds of places. Friends, I purchase them online, purchase some at stores. It just depends when I'm out and I see things. But Dollar Tree seeds, they're 4 for $1. And there's still plenty of seeds in here. And oftentimes when you're growing, there's certain things that you grow, packets have so many more seeds. They have enough seeds for like 5 years worth of growing that crop, which is oftentimes more than what we need. So these packets are smaller, but they're 25 cents. And so I bought yesterday 20 packets of seeds and I spent $5. So if you haven't bought seeds at Dollar Tree and you have Dollar Tree near you, definitely go check them out, see if they have anything you want to grow. They don't have the greatest variety, but they do have some of the things that I needed. And they had lettuce yesterday, so that was great. So I'm gonna go ahead and get the other lettuce planted too, and then I'll mix it all in. All right, and there is the lettuce. Now, I don't grow, just being honest, I don't grow a ton of lettuce. I grow food based on what I can cook, what my family is going to eat. And lettuce is one of those things that is great. I love fresh lettuce. I love the flavor of it. We eat it on sandwiches and like on tacos and salads, of course, and wraps. So there's lots of uses for lettuce, but you can't cook it, you know, like can't put it in smoothies. I mean, I guess you could, but so I grow more greens that are a little bit more versatile because essentially all the leafy greens that I like to cook, I can also eat raw in salads, especially when they're young. So that's why I grow a lot of other greens too, because if I'm making a wrap, if I put some baby kale on it, it's a little bit more nutritionally, it's just more nutrition in that. So I grow more greens that are like brassicas or other leafy greens that I can use multiple ways in smoothies, cooked and raw in salads and on wraps and things like that than I do lettuce. But I do like to have some lettuce because I just love the flavor of it, and that nice crisp lettuce, especially on tacos and sandwiches, is hard to beat. So that's why I don't grow a ton of lettuce. All right, so this tray is done. I'm gonna set this down under the lights. I haven't turned them on yet, but where it's gonna live for a little while. right, so time to move on to the stuff that I'm putting in the bigger trays. Okay, so now I'm ready to plant the other crops, the ones that are gonna go into these larger containers. Now, just a heads up, in case you're wondering, it's still the same day, but my camera battery died, and then I lost sunlight, so I had to bring in some artificial light, charge my camera, and while that was happening, I decided to go ahead and start dinner because it needs to sit for a little while and cook, simmer. And in doing so, I shook a bottle of Worcestershire, I can never say that word, but you know what I'm talking about, Worcestershire sauce, and the lid was not on good, and so it got all over my shirt that I was wearing, so I had to switch to this shirt. So, in case you're wondering why I'm in a different outfit and the lighting is different. All right, so here I have collards. I'm gonna plant collards here, Scotch blue kale in these two, and then curly kale in this one as well, except this curly kale is gonna be a dwarf variety, so it says. So I'm gonna have a few more of these. So technically I should be able to fit 4 of those in 1 square foot, but the Scotch kale, usually just 1, because what I grew last year, when I grew the same last year, it got really big, like took up the whole square, which was great, you know, the leaves were just gigantic. So let's get that ready to go. So here's the Scotch kale, and then here's the dwarf kale, and my collards are right here. So once again, tiny seeds, I'll just make little divots. To plant them. And I'm actually also interested to see kind of if these plants that are in the smaller containers do okay. Because I know that plants tend to grow, like the roots will try to fill up the container. So they might actually do better in the smaller ones because they're only going to be in them for about 4 weeks. Possibly 5 or 6, but let's see, today is, what is the day? It's January 23rd, so 4 weeks will have us almost to the end of February, which is about when I want to put these out, because we don't get, it's unlikely that we'll get a really hard freeze after the end of February. Now we get our last average frost is like often around the first week of April, but obviously these can handle a little frost. They just can't handle down into the 20s. So by 4 weeks from now, I'll be able to take a look at the forecast and see if it's going to be getting, if we're going to be getting a deep freeze, because you know you can see 10 to 14 days out. So based on that information, I'll use that to determine when these go out. So, you know, if I look February 23rd and I can see all the way through, you know, the first week of March, then I'll be able to tell whether or not we're going to get a deep freeze. And if we're not, then I'll put them out sooner rather than later. If we are, then of course I'll wait till that freeze passes. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not, like, it's not impossible we'll get a freeze after the first week of March. It's just unlikely. And in gardening, that's what you do, right? You look at the probability. Oh no, y'all, I just put Georgia Southern collard seeds in all of these instead of just in these 2. So I am gonna try to fish them out, y'all. Okay, I might edit some of this so I don't look so stupid, but you know what? You guys get to see me looking really dumb. And I need to fish them out because it is really hard to tell the difference in the plants. Like when they first grow, collards and kale look quite similar. Oh wait, these are the ones that need to stay in. Okay, Regina, don't be dumb. All right, these are good. You and you're fine. But when they first sprout, it's hard to tell the difference. It's gonna be hard for me to just put them in there as well. So I'm gonna try to scoop them out the best I can. I'm just gonna leave the camera running so y'all know, not that I'm a big YouTuber anyway, but y'all know that we all do really silly things sometimes. But anyway, so So I'm sure I didn't get all the seeds because it was hard to see them, but I guess I'll have to grow them a little bit bigger before thinning, so I can tell the difference. Because once they get their true leaves and start getting a little bit bigger, I'll be able to compare them to these that I know are collards, and hopefully figure out what's going on. All right, so this is the kale. Whoa. The regular size kale going in here. And then the dwarf kale is going in these 6 cells. These seeds are from 2014. Might I add, I found them in a drawer in my kitchen because that was where I used to keep seeds a few years ago, several years ago, because I gardened and then I stopped for a couple years and then I picked it back up in 2020. And then 2021, I got really serious, and last year got crazy serious with it and started growing all my plants from seed and all of that. But yeah, so that's part of the reason why I'm okay having some extra of these, because they may not all germinate, so I'm just gonna be very generous in planting them, because you can always thin. All right, so those are done. And here's my last tray. Here is where I'm putting a lot of cabbage. Oh, and my lacinato kale. Lacinato kale seeds I actually have ordered. I realized that I was out of them, so I had to order some, and they're gonna get here tomorrow, so I'm not gonna plant these today, but I'll plant them tomorrow, so they'll be at about the same rate as all the other things. But I need my probably shouldn't have done that, because that was how I messed up before. I made all the holes at once. So these I put I tried to do 2, but I could never roll out just 2. So it's the golden acre cabbage. I'm putting them over here so I don't forget what I've done already. Next up is red cabbage. And I found it's just much easier to kind of have all these things labeled in advance. And then, because you kind of have to have a system, because like I said, the seeds blend in, they blend in with the soil, so it's hard to know what you've done, what you haven't done. And so when I've done the seeds, I set them over here so that I know I've already done the ones that are labeled for that. And then labeling them ahead of time just makes my life easier when I'm planting. So that system just works for me. Okay, this is red acre cabbage. I've actually never grown this. So, kind of excited to have some. I love red cabbage. We love cabbage. That's why I grow so much of it. My kids like cabbage. I really like cabbage. So, for us, it's something worthwhile to grow a bunch of. Alright, so here is the michihili cabbage. It's another Chinese cabbage. Grows upright and cylindrical. Cool stuff. I'll put all these on the screen, and I've said that like 40 times now. I can't help it. I'm just talking. Savoy cabbage I love so much. I grew a really gigantic one one year, and then last year the Savoy did not work out for me because I had 2 beds last year that I used for cool weather stuff, and one of the beds, the plants in it just did not grow. I don't know why. I suspect it was something with the soil that I had purchased for it, and maybe some of it had, I know I've read about sometimes store-bought soils, some of the less reputable ones can have like not pesticides, like herbicides in them, just from where they were taken from. Obviously, it's not something anybody's doing on purpose, but they can, and it can have a bad effect. Because I had things I planted in this bed, and I literally like filled the beds at nearly the same time, but I planted all the crops in them at the same time, in one bed and the other, and then in one bed they just did not grow. Now by the end of summer, things were some of the stuff started growing, but the cabbage had like sprouted, but then it just died. And I put savoy cabbage in that bed, but not in the other bed. So in the other bed I put golden acre cabbage, which grew fine. We got to eat it, but we didn't get any savoy because by then it was too late, and I didn't really do a lot of fall planting this year because my summer garden was just so big. I just didn't have make time for it because I was still working full time trying to take care of a raised bed garden that was like 10, I don't remember how many raised beds I have, maybe 14, but it was a lot. So I didn't plant a lot for fall or really anything, so I haven't gotten savoy cabbage yet. Sure, you didn't necessarily need that whole story, but you know what, you're here watching my videos, you get to know what happened. So I'm really excited for savoy cabbage. The savoy cabbage I grew in, I want to say 2020. I grew it from starts that my mom had purchased, and she had bought too many, so she gave them to me. And I grew them, and they grew gigantic and delicious, and it made me want savoy cabbage because it was just so sweet, and my kids loved it, we loved it, it was just great. So I was like, from now on I'm growing savoy cabbage. And then last year was a big fat failure, so hopefully you get some this year. That's why I have putting so many seeds in here. And I gave them the big cups because I really want it. Okay, and then lastly, so that's it, because the only other thing I have to plant is the lacinato kale, which I can't plant until tomorrow because I don't have the seeds. And they should have been here today, because I actually bought them on Amazon, which I don't do a whole lot. I bought a few seeds on Amazon, and they've been fine, but in general, I try to buy them from, like seed companies that I've purchased from before that I know a little bit more about, because when you buy them on Amazon, you really don't know where they're coming from sometimes. So, but when I want something like right away, then it's easier. And also on Amazon, they tend to be more expensive, I've learned too. So, but when you want them, because I wanted them soon, because I just realized a couple of days ago when I was pulling out my seeds to get ready, that I didn't have any more lacinato kale, and it grew so well, and it's so tender. It's just delicious. My plants, they actually recently died. Like the beginning of January, the kale plants that I planted last February died because we got not a crazy deep freeze, but it got down to the 20s over New Year's, and that's when the plants died. But they are, I want to say, like as taller than my waist level, and I'm 5'5", so they got really tall and grew lots, and we ate a lot of kale from them. So I'm excited to have some more plants growing, because that fed a lot of smoothies and a lot of dinners and a lot of soups, and so I want more. But anyway, so that is it. The next thing I'm gonna do, I've gotten everything planted. I'm really excited about that. Now I just need to get them under the lights. Now, of course, plants, most of these, aside from the tall Utah cabbage that needs light in order to germinate, most of these plants don't need to necessarily be under the lights in order to germinate, so you don't have to turn them on until they sprout. But you never know when they're gonna sprout, and the lights produce a little bit of heat, which for most of them helps them to germinate a little more quickly. I'm gonna put these here under this shelf. So when it comes to taking care of your plants, of your seedlings, the thing you want to keep in mind is that they need once the seedlings emerge, then you need to provide them with light. You're gonna provide them with bright light that mimics daylight. If you look at my video about building my lighting rack, I talk about kind of what kind of light that you need for it, but I use shop lights that I purchased in bulk and attach them to this shelf, but you need light that mimics daylight, and I like to give them light for 12 to 16 hours a day, just because, you know, the more light they get, the better and faster they grow, but they do need a period of not light. So don't leave the lights on 24 hours thinking they're gonna grow faster, you'll cheat the system. No, they do need like a rest period during the day. So 12 to 16 hours of that light each day. The light needs to be pretty close to them. Now, of course, that depends on the type of light you have and the strength of it. Some of the really, really strong, you know, grow lights, people mount them in the ceiling and have plants everywhere. So, but in general, if you're using shop lights, most likely they need to be just a few inches away from the plants. And so light 16 hours a day once the seedlings emerge, as soon as the seedlings emerge if possible, which is one of the reasons why I like to have my lights on already, so that as soon as they emerge, they're met with that bright light. And also as far as fertilizer goes, since I grow my seedlings in just peat moss for michihili, there really isn't any nutritional value there. Now, of course, the seed has enough nutrition in the seed coating to emerge from the soil, so there is a little bit of nutrition in there, and to grow its first leaves and the true leaves as well. But once the true leaves emerge on my seedlings, then I do start fertilizing them. I fertilize them about every week or every other week, just depending on how they're looking. I use a water-soluble synthetic fertilizer. The reason I use a synthetic fertilizer is because organic fertilizers are very smelly. They often smell like fish because often that's what they're made of, or something else because they are organic. And I don't want my house to stink. It's stinky, especially in my tiny office. No, that is a no-go for me. And plus, synthetic fertilizers are perfectly safe for the plants. They have the nitrogen is nitrogen, phosphorus is phosphorus, potassium is potassium. But it just depends on what sources they're derived from, whether they were made in a lab or they have come from organic matter. Now, out in my garden, I use organic fertilizers because there is an ecosystem that I'm trying to balance. You know, there's worms and bacteria and things like that, and I don't want any, synthetic fertilizers messing that up. So I use organic in the garden. But when it comes to seedlings that I use in my house, I use a synthetic fertilizer. I actually use just Miracle-Gro. Some people hate this stuff, I guess. I've seen people on videos call it names, which is fine. We're all entitled to our own opinions. But it works great for me. This, I also use it for my houseplants, so it works out. But for the seedlings, use it at half strength. So I just mix it up in a jug. Probably have one in here. I use old milk jugs or just containers like that to water my plants. What I like to do is keep a couple of jugs filled with water already. And the reason why is because over time, the fluoride and the chlorine and things like that evaporate from the water. So I'll fill them with filtered water. So from my filter pitcher in the kitchen, I'll fill my water jugs and then just let them sit until I need them. That way, by the time I'm using the water in my plants, some of the fluoride and chlorine has evaporated from it so that the plants are getting water that's even better for them. Because some plants, I haven't had an issue with my seedlings, but I know some of my houseplants are sensitive to the chemicals in tap water. So that helps to neutralize that just a little bit by using filtered water and then also letting it sit for however long until I use it. But this fertilizer, it's just the all-purpose plant food. Now, obviously, there's different types of fertilizers you can get. I just buy this one because it was inexpensive. I already have it in my house for my houseplants, so it works great for this purpose. But I mix it at half strength and then bottom water my seedlings with that mixture at that strength. And that works great for them. And so I water them whenever they need it. I don't know how to describe that any better, but when the top of the soil is dry, you can tell because it looks dry. When that happens, that is when I water, bottom water, and about once a week or sometimes once every other week, I'll use the fertilized water because of course they do need nutrients to grow well here in this environment, and there really aren't any in the soil. And so here are the things we just put here. So they are. If you're interested in creating a shelf like this with lights attached, I do have a video on how I made this one. It was really easy. Just purchased a shelf at Target. I purchased the lights for it. And notice I have these on the floor because I have lights under here because I wanted to get the most out of the shelf. So I have lights at every level. And then at the top, I can just store things. Sometimes I'll put seeds there waiting to germinate if I don't have space underneath. So thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. I hope that you found the content helpful and that you learned something that you can take into your gardening journey. Remember, gardening is not anything that is too hard for you to do. You can start large, you can start small, but just start. Growing your own food is really amazing. Your family will love it. It's more nutritious than what you can buy. It's more tasty than what you can buy. If you haven't tasted fresh grown cabbage, oh my gosh, you're missing out. It is delicious. Or fresh beets. So it's really worthwhile. It's really worth it, really healthy. And it's just a very peaceful hobby and great for problem solving too. But either way, thank you for sticking around. Thank you for watching this video. If you found this content helpful, please click that like button and subscribe so you'll be ready for updates. Of course, I will be shooting more videos as these things progress. And if I learn how to use that feature in YouTube where you can post pictures, I'll post images as these things sprout and then create another video showing their progress. And of course, I'll have videos for when they go out into the yard and when I start my summer crops, etc. So lots of content to come. But once again, thank you for sticking around. Share this video with those that you feel like it would be helpful for. Like, subscribe. Thanks. Have a great one.